Space is a way of living. Space is not something we have. Space is something we practice. And especially in the Western modern world, we get very trained to to be in the activity or to look at objects in our awareness. It's like when you read a book, and as you read that book, how often, when you're really into the book, how often do you remember that you're looking at paper? But the paper is what allows for the letters. And the letters give words, sentences. When we read them, it animates a meaning, it animates an experience, an understanding, it transmits data. But all of it is kind of grounded in space. And that's why space is actually a very important aspect to embrace complexity. Because if the book hadn't all that paper, all those letters couldn't be composing kind of storyline or the content of the book. And that's true for our lives too. When our inner space is too tight, we cannot really embrace and be in the experience. And that gives me another, I think, important aspect that because of the increase of data, like life becomes faster as we go through this hour here. And that means also the planet's shrinking on the one hand, because we become more and more a global village because of all that data circulating with the speed of light around the planet. And and so we are more and more challenged to let the flow of that data go through us, which means we can ground the movement. But if there is trauma in my system, then the heightened speed of data, the heightened speed of light and of experience cannot ground itself. So it starts to create a pressure. And many people nowadays feel that pressure. We feel that's why there's such a need for mindfulness. There's such a need for slowing down. There's a need to go on retreat. There's a need for meditation. And there's a real need because we need to develop a skill to embrace that speed of data with a new inner capacity. And the capacity is not new, that exists thousands of years in wisdom traditions. But now we need it mainstream because life is getting faster and it hits inner tensions, stagnations. And where the speed of data hits stagnations, we produce heat, we produce inflammations, autoimmune disease. It creates a lot of side effects or symptoms, mental health issues. So when we when we cultivate space, we actually are saying that we, in a on a deeper level in our being, we say, "Oh, I understand that that which is aware that I feel my body is as important as feeling my body, is as important as my body." I'll say this again. That which is aware right now, that I feel my body, when I feel my body, something in me is aware that I feel my body. Awareness, when I look at what's actually aware, is space, inner space. Awareness, there are different levels of awareness. One level of awareness is that I'm aware of what I'm feeling. When I examine that awareness, then I see, actually data is arising in space. So data, when I feel my leg, when I feel my belly, when I feel my emotions, when I'm aware of my thoughts, all of that happens in an inner space of awareness. So it's arising. And my body sensations, my emotions, my thoughts are all movements. So there's awareness of movement all the time. We call it my internal or external sense perception. So when I'm aware of you, I'm also aware that I'm feeling you. When I'm aware of my body or what's happening in me, I'm aware that I feel myself. So space is equally important. We call it a conscious experience. That space is as important as the data, is as important as the body. So in an increasingly fast and complex world, there's a higher demand on the inner capacity to be aware of that world. And I'm sure many of us know when we get triggered, when we have arguments, when somebody says something, it stresses us, when we see war situations in the world, when we see the impact of climate disasters, when we feel maybe climate anxiety, or when we feel that there is no hope for the next generations. These are all a lot of inner movements that need an awareness to be, first of all, a conscious movement. Because as long as it's unconscious, it runs me. That's why I often say unconscious information or process is destiny. Because as long as it's unconscious, it's happening without me knowing. So it's running me. Conscious process has a choice. Unconscious process has no choice. The choice is in the past. And so when we generate more space in ourselves through an internal practice, because space is as important as the information, is as important as the physical reality, the body situations, then there is more conscious awareness of one's own inner process. And if we as a community understand how important space is, because it's so simple that it can easily be undervalued. But if we undervalue space, we undervalue consciousness. We don't give consciousness the space it needs for us to have a choice in life, for us to be aware of the process that's happening. And so when we look into our world, we see when we are facing what some people call the polycrisis, like a kind of a collection of different crises that accumulate and create more and more stress and more impact. We actually need communities that are cultivating space, because as we cultivate space, as also Otto Schama puts it beautifully, when in the theory U, in space or presence, the future is being born. So we become actually responsive and responsible towards the future, because we start listening to the future. And the future is not a later point in time, but a new level of consciousness. It's a new insight that can become a scientific breakthrough, that can become a startup, that can become a social innovation, that can become a creative process. So space is actually the hub where the past undigested information, we said before, space is the capacity to digest our experience. Trauma healing needs space. If you go to a trauma therapist, if you go to a group, if you go to a healing space, there's space that enables the past undigested information to be integrated into now. That's why we could say history is not the past. History is sitting here speaking, is sitting here listening, is sitting here having this group experience. Integrated history is presence. Unintegrated history shows up between us as fears, aggression, shame, as all kinds of processes, insecurities, doubts, numbness, that affect the way we are together in presence. So unintegrated history is the past. Integrated history is the present capacity to live this life. And so space, again, is the hub where we can allow the past to catch up, where we can allow the movements, the stagnations, the unlived experiences, the suppressed experiences to come back and find a loving space that can embrace it, can digest it, can integrate that data and grow in perspective. That's what we call post-traumatic learning.